All right, today we will be talking about the evidence gathering technique first. What is the evidence gathering technique? Like in the last lecture, we talked about gathering the evidence. That means the audit test or the audit procedures through which we are gathering the evidence to support our opinion. We also talked about the assertions related to the class of transaction. That means related to the statement of profit and loss. We also talked about the assertion related to the statement of financial position, which is known as account balances. For example, the classification, existence, ownership, rights and obligations. And then we talked about the assertions related to the notes, that means the disclosures. So basically what we are doing is we are gathering the evidence, and the evidence is being gathered through the audit test or the audit procedures. And whenever we are having an audit procedure or an audit test, the objective is to test a particular assertion. Like, for example, we are talking about the property, plant, and equipment, and we are physically inspecting the assets. So we are checking the existence assertion. So whenever we are having an audit test, whenever we are having an audit procedure, then that means we are talking about a particular assertion being tested. All right, so today we are going to talk about the evidence gathering technique, which is something very important. Evidence gathering technique. Now, this is simply AEIOU. So again, you already know that A stands for analytical procedure. And then we have inquiry, analytical procedures. Then we have inquiries, or you can also call as discussions. Then we have inspections, observations, and then we have the recalculations. Now, remember this thing, that whenever we are having audit procedure question in the exam, it can be either a knowledge-based thing. For example, the examiner asks you straight away, no case study and no constructive response question. The examiner simply gives you a requirement. For example, audit procedures related to the year-end receivable balance, audit procedures related to the year-end payable balance, audit procedure related to the litigation. Now, no case studies being involved, straight away you need to write 4 to 5 procedures according to the marks. 1 procedure for 1 mark. Sometimes, we are having attempts, like obviously this is an exceptional situation, but we have that thing within the past, that the examiner has asked particularly regarding the audit procedures using this evidence gathering technique, like applying analytical procedure, inquiries, inspection, observation, and recalculation. So if the examiner again asks you in any of the attempt, for example, that you are supposed to use this evidence gathering technique, then we should stick to this AEIOU. Similarly, when we are having a case study, then there's no particular technique required over there, but all you need to do is to relate your audit procedures with the case study. We'll be doing the questions, and then you can understand that thing easily. And then remember, when the examiner gives you the audit procedures, it can be even in the constructive response question or the objective test questions that make audit procedures related to the particular assertion, then make sure that you are not writing anything other than being asked. So here we have the evidence gathering technique, which is known as AEIOU. Analytical procedure is all about comparisons. It's all about, the comparisons with the previous year. For example, you talk about compare this year depreciation with the previous year and investigate differences. Compare this year warranty provision with the previous year. Compare this year receivable allowance with the previous year. But make sure we are comparing a thing, we are comparing a balance which is present within the financial statement on routine basis. Every year you can find those balances. For example, Depreciation, we know that every year we are having a depreciation. Like you cannot say that this year we are having only the depreciation charge. In previous year, there was no depreciation charge. Now, this is something very unusual. This is not the case. Depreciation is every year, an expense which is charged every year. Similarly, the receivable allowances. So if you're selling the goods on credit and you're having a receivable balance, then every year you have this allowance for receivable thing within your financial statement. Similarly, you talk about the warranty provisions. Warranty provisions. Now, when you're offering a warranty on a regular basis on your sales, products, services, then even the warranty provision is a routine balance within your financial statement. So if you're talking about a routine balance, then you can write this thing comparison of this year with the previous year. But something which is one-off, for example, litigation provision. Now, litigation is not something which the entity face every year. So do not write compare this year litigation provision with the previous year, because sometimes you cram the things, you learn the things, and then you just apply it straight away without looking at the scenario, without looking at the situation, the context. So there are things which we can do on the regular basis: depreciation, amortization, impairment, and similarly the warranty provision, but not things like that. For example, the litigation provision, redundancy provisions. These are not the routine balances within your financial statement. So do not write those things. So analytical procedure is all about, the comparisons, and alongside comparisons, we have the ratios. And comparisons is, for example, with the previous year, previous years, and even with comparison with the industry practices. It can be done as well. So when we talk about the ratios, similar, it can be, for example, the current ratio, the quick ratio, and comparing the current ratio of those 2 years, receivable days. So receivable, payable, inventory days, and then comparing those days. For example, comparing this year receivable days with the previous year. If the receivable days are increasing, then allowance should be increased as well. So analytical procedure is all about the comparisons, ratios, through which what you can do is you can detect the unusual changes within the financial statements. For example, if the sale is increasing, the warranty provision should increase as well. If the loans are increasing, the finance cost should increase as well. So if you compare the loans and there's an increase in the loans, but there's no increase within the finance cost, and that suggests obviously they have probably understated their finance cost. But we are not talking about understated or overstated over here, because we are already done with that thing within the audit risk section. So here what we are doing is we are applying the audit test in order to confirm those figures, presentation, disclosures within the financial statements. Then we have the inquiries. Now, when you talk about the inquiries, remember one thing: this inquiry should be made, or discussion should be made, discussion with the relevant personnel. Discussion with the relevant personnel. So these are again something very important. Because if you talk about nowadays regarding the audit and assurance exam, so you can say, roughly speaking, that from this area, the substantive procedures, the audit procedures, you get around 35 to 40 mark paper. A full question coming of 20 marks from this area. So you just separate those 20. And then, for example, a part of 5 to 6 marks in another question, because we have 3 constructive response questions. So one full question, that means 20 marks. Another part, for example, in any of the 2 questions, for example, for 6 marks, 26 marks. And then, for example, for 10 marks within the objective test questions, objective test case questions, then it makes around 36, so around 35 to 40, roughly speaking. Nowadays, we have the paper from this substantive procedures, the audit procedures. And if you understand these things, these are the absolute marks that you can get within the exam. And now, Either it will be 0 or 1. You get from the one substantive procedure is well written one substantive procedure. So let's assume it is coming in the exam for 35 marks. So you do 30 well written substantive procedure. So that means 30 out of 30. Not only it assures your pass, but you can pass your FAT exam in good marks. So this is one of the most important and also the critical area of the audit and assurance exam. That is why I'm spending more time on this, that you just secure your easy marks, easy and absolute marks. So inquiries is all about discussion with the relevant personnel. Now, for example, you need to ask something regarding the accounting policies, the consistency of accounting policies, the reasonableness of accounting estimate. For example, they're changing the depreciation methods. So you need to confirm the rationale or the basis. They're changing their receivable allowances. They're changing their provisions. They are changing their, for example, estimations. So what you need to do is ask from the finance director, discuss with the finance director, inquiries from management regarding the rationale or the basis of the accounting estimate that is being changed, and confirm the reasonableness of those accounting estimates. So discussion with the relevant personnel. Remember this thing, discussion always with the relevant personnel. And then we have the inspections. Now, inspection of what? Inspections of the documents, for example. The documents, for example, the files, for example, the registers. And then alongside, we have the physical inspection as well. For example, you are checking the non-current asset register to confirm the inclusion of the assets in when there is a purchase of the property, plant. So documents, files, registers, inspecting the signatures, even sometimes, to confirm the board approval regarding some matter, for example. So documents, files, registers, physical inspection, but make sure we are talking about the substantive procedures now. And everything which is being called substantive procedure should be related to the financial statement. Because if you're relating it with the system, that is going to become the test of control. Now we have the observations. Now observation is observing the processes and the procedures. Now again, do not confuse this observation with the test of control. You are having this technique within the test of control as well, but here the objective is the financial statement. For example, we talk about observe how the claims are actually dealt with. We'll be doing an example in a while. And that procedure is related to the financial statement. That is why we call it as a substantive procedure. And then we have the recalculations or recomputations, and then agreeing that figure with the management's figure. So this is all about AEIOU. And now let's do an example. And example, let's take, for example, first, the allowance for receivables. Allowance for receivables. Okay, starting with the A. Compare this year receivable allowance with that of previous year and investigate differences. compare this year receivable allowance with that of previous year and investigate differences. Or we can write the similar procedure in another way. Let's just write another color. The same procedure. Compare this year receivable allowance with previous year and confirm whether the increase or decrease is correctly recorded in the financial statement, because we know we have a different treatment for increase in allowance. If the allowance is increasing, it is recorded as an expense. So debit expense and credit goes to the allowance. It increases. That and decrease is the difference. It's a reversal of expense, and it also decreases the allowance in the allowance ledger. So we can write these procedures in two ways. Okay, so we are done with the A, and now let's talk about the AE. Now, allowance for receivable is an accounting estimate, and this is a percentage the management has taken that, okay, this much percentage we expect that may not be paying. So these are the percentages of doubtful debts. So because this is an accounting estimate, so what you can do is you can confirm the rationale of that from the finance director. Discuss with finance director. In exam, you're supposed to write the full finance director. Do not write FD. Discuss with finance director the rationale, or you can also call it as a basis of allowance for receivable and confirm the reasonableness of accounting estimates. So you discuss with the finance director, like, what is the rationale of the allowance of receivables? For example, they have having the 2% percentage. So how this 2% has been derived, and confirm the reasonableness of accounting estimates, like whether their accounting estimate is reasonable. And how we can confirm that, like, for example, they were expecting that their doubtful debts would be 2%, but in actual, they're having the bad debts, for example, 5%. So that means their allowance was not appropriate. So this is the second one, which is the inquiry. Now what we can do is inspection. So inspection of documents, for example, inspect the aged receivable analysis. Now what is this aged receivable analysis? In which we can see the number of days the customers are taking to pay, the credit customers, like how many of them are related to 30 days, how many of them are 45 days. So inspect the aged receivable analysis and confirm whether the specific allowance is created against the two old receivable balances. Like, for example, there are some balances which are well beyond the credit limit. For example, 30 days is the normal credit limit, and they are not paying from last 120 days. So confirm whether the specific allowance, because we know there's a general allowance for overall receivables, and then we have the specific allowance for specific receivables. So inspect the aged receivable analysis and confirm whether the specific allowance is created against the two old receivable balances. So this is inspection And now let's come to the observation and make sure even the observation is related to the financial statement, then it is going to be called as substantive procedure. So for example, observation. Okay, observe how the receivable balances are being followed up by the receivable department once they exceed credit period. Allowance should be increased if there is no or less follow-up. Like observe how they're following up the receivable balances. For example, if you see the receivable department, they're making the calls to the receivables, they're chasing them. So that means, okay, fine, they're working on it. They will recover it. But for example, if they're not making any effort to recover the receivable, that means there are more chances that the receivable will get bad, and allowance should be increased as a result. So see, what I have done is I have related this observed thing with the financial statement. So that is how you make it as a substantive procedure. If you're not making it, then it will become a test of control if you're just relating it with the system. Then we have the last one, which is recalculate. Recalculate the closing allowance using the management's estimate and agree the figure with that of financial statement. So recalculate the closing allowance. Like for example, you know the year-end receivable balance, multiply it with the allowance percentage, recalculate yourself, and agree the figure which they have recorded within the financial statement. If that is the same, then that means they have correctly recorded the allowance. If that is not the same and there are differences, then you need to investigate the differences. So this is AEIOU, and you can apply it anywhere. For example, if it is about depreciation, compare this year depreciation with the previous year, investigate differences. Inquiry is the same, like discuss with the finance director the rationale of the depreciation methods. Like for example, if they're using the straight line method, for example, for some assets, reducing balance, how they are reaching those methods. Inspections is that inspecting the depreciation schedule. Okay, observe, what is physically inspect the asset, observe the assets which are in the working condition, and confirm the depreciation is being charged on all the available assets. Observation, recalculate the depreciation charge, and agree the figure with the financial statement. So you can apply this AEIOU anywhere. So if the examiner is asking you specifically in the exam, which is an exceptional case, then you should stick to this AEIOU. Otherwise, if it is general question, and obviously there is no specific requirement, you can use this technique to make some of the procedures, but make sure you're applying it well. Any procedure which does not give a full meaning that why you are applying this procedure. For example, compare this year allowance with the previous year. Obviously, this does not give any full meaning. What you need to do it, write it completely and investigate differences. Compare this year receivable allowance with the previous year and confirm whether the increase and decrease is correctly recorded within the financial statement. So make sure you are writing the complete audit procedure. Otherwise, you will not be getting any mark for it. So this is one of the technique that we use in making the audit procedures and the substantive procedures, AEIOU.